Breaking. Georgia has stabbed Putin in the back. Everyone is turning away from Russia. Terrorist oil is no longer needed by anyone. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a line is forming for Ukraine's support. These historic agreements will change everything. The end of Shahed drones. The Baltic states are strengthening their air defense. Fallen drones have become the last straw. Poland and Estonia are entering the game with powerful air defense missiles. The sky will be strongly protected. Meanwhile, Russia continues to sink into disasters. Watch until the end, because today we break down what's happening right now. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Russia is being turned away from once again. Georgia's only oil refinery is completely abandoning Russian oil.
We will fully replace Russian oil with oil from Turkmenistan and later also from Kazakhstan, which will allow us to export products to the EU.
He emphasized that the EU currently prohibits the import of petroleum products derived from Russian oil. At the same time, Potskhveria explained that the company's strategic goal is to export to the European market. The CEO of BSP noted that an obstacle to fully abandoning oil from the aggressor country is the delay in launching the transit of Turkmen oil to Georgia on Azerbaijan's side.
I, of course, hope that this issue will be resolved soon, and we will be able to launch this railway connection, which will then be followed by Kazakh oil, and so on.
This month, the EU added BSP to a preliminary list of companies under sanctions for importing and processing Russian oil. Therefore, Georgia no longer wants to have anything to do with Russia. In the Middle East, there is a line forming for Ukraine's help. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced historic agreements. Ukraine has allegedly begun making deals with Middle Eastern countries on protection against Iranian drones. The work is ongoing. Zelensky stated this in his evening address. According to the head of state, his visit to the Middle East was very productive. He noted a positive attitude toward Ukraine, its soldiers, and its experience. The president added that Gulf countries share a common vision of working with Ukraine and Ukrainian experts.
There are already agreements, historic agreements, Ukraine and Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar. We are also working with Jordan and Kuwait. Rustam Umarov is currently in the region, continuing negotiations at the political level, he reported to me today. And there are already additional requests from Bahrain and Oman.
Zelensky said that based on Ukraine's defense systems and the skills of its soldiers, he expects strong security cooperation.
We have already agreed on the possibility of strengthening air defense, joint development of defense production, and also energy cooperation. This includes diesel and other things that are critically needed right now.
The Baltic states have called for strengthening air defense after drone incidents. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania stated that drone crashes on their territory highlight the importance of reinforcing NATO's eastern flank air defense. The countries also expressed support for Ukraine in defending against Russian aggression.
However, recent incidents fueled by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine demonstrate the importance to further strengthen multi-layered air defense.
This week, the ministers noted several foreign UAVs entered NATO airspace and crashed in Baltic territories. While investigations continue to clarify all details, the three countries remain firm in their support for Ukraine's defense operations and its right to self-defense. The ministers stressed that NATO efforts to strengthen air defense, including counter-drone measures, must be accelerated.
Allies must urgently reinforce the capabilities required for effective detection and interception. The current presence of NATO aircraft and air defense systems in the Baltic states must be maintained and further strengthened to counter all air threats, including unmanned aerial vehicles.
The countries also emphasized the need to significantly increase and target EU defense funding in the long term, particularly to strengthen its eastern border through initiatives such as Eastern Flank Watch and the European Counter-UAV Initiative. New low-cost missiles against Shahed drones. Poland, together with Estonian company Frankenberg Technologies, is launching production of affordable Mark I missiles to counter Shahed-type drones. Mass production is expected to reach up to 10,000 units per year. The first test of the system could take place in Ukraine as early as this spring and summer. The main idea behind the new development is to create an affordable alternative to expensive air defense systems for destroying kamikaze drones. Instead of using costly missiles, compact and cheaper interceptors are proposed, capable of operating effectively at short ranges. Mark I missiles will have a range of up to 2 kilometers and will be able to hit targets at altitudes of up to 1.5 kilometers. Manufacturers are focusing on mass production and speed, which will allow them to cover large volumes of drone threats. In the future, developers plan to create an improved version of the missiles with longer range, up to 5 to 8 kilometers. This will expand their capabilities and increase effectiveness against various aerial targets. Explosions again across Russia, Taganrog, Tolyatti, and once again the port of Ust-Luga. Meanwhile, Ukraine's armed forces are delivering a strong response to the enemy on the intense Pokrovsk front. Full details from the front line are in our military report.
SPS operators struck a base of multiple launch rocket systems, BM-30 Smerch and Tornado S of the Russian forces on the temporarily occupied territories of Crimea. The enemy's fuel logistics in the Luhansk region also took a hit. And here's a demonstration, so to speak, of the powerful Russian air defense. Frankly, after seeing this footage, it's not surprising to see the following results. These are shots of the fire at the Ust-Luga port after the drone attack. And in this video, it's evening Taganrog. A series of impacts were recorded there.
As of today, we finally have enough military weaponry and unmanned robotic systems, especially unmanned aerial vehicles and drones, that can now successfully reach and strike targets in, as you can see, both Moscow and St. Petersburg, and almost as far as the remote regions of the Russian Far East.
According to monitoring public channels, drones attacked the Russian strategic chemical plant Kuibyshev Azot in Tolyatti,
primarily focusing on the entirety of their logistical infrastructure, such as critical railway junctions and strategic bridges. This includes various industrial enterprises, companies, and essential oil storage depots that work for the Russian military-industrial complex to provide necessary supplies to the Russian armed forces.
The occupiers are desperately trying to break through into Grishino, but end up in hell itself, where Ukrainian defenders send them.
If we have a sufficient number of aircraft to drive Russian aviation away from the front line, which is destroying our defensive positions with their KAB bombs. And by securing the skies over Ukraine, believe me, with our long-range drones, we will very quickly force Russia to its knees.
A military operation by the US and Israel against Iran could push the world into a new round of the nuclear arms race, Bloomberg writes. Unfortunately,
due to the sluggish policies of our partners, Europe was counting on America. America said, don't count on us, handle it yourselves. Well, essentially, where is America located and where is Ukraine? And for Europe, Putin is right behind them, just over the fence. Just like for Ukraine, he's right over the fence. But America is across the ocean. So which America does Europe want to rely on?
Governments of countries from the North Atlantic Ocean to the Western Pacific Ocean are increasingly openly considering the need to acquire their own nuclear weapons. Whether this will work out in practice, time will tell.
Ukraine and Europe are showing the United States how the world should unite in the fight against Putin's terrorism. Kaja Kallas, for example, openly criticized the US, directly addressing Rubio for not increasing pressure on Moscow. And this is just one example. More details in the report.
The US and Europe have entered into a real confrontation because of the war in Ukraine. At the G7 meeting, the head of European diplomacy, Kallas, and US Secretary of State Rubio exchanged sharp statements. Kallas criticized the US for the fact that a year has passed and nothing has changed. When will their patience with Russia finally run out?
This is a typical Russian negotiation tactic to demand what never belonged to them. And this is a trap we should not fall into. If we, together with the Americans, put pressure on Russia, we can put an end to the war in Ukraine and establish a solid, lasting peace. We see that Russia is assisting Iran with intelligence to carry out strikes and kill Americans, as well as providing drones for attacks on neighboring countries and American military bases. If the Americans want to stop the war, they need to put pressure on the Russians so that they cannot help Iran.
Rubio responded that they had already done a lot, and if the Europeans know better, they can try it themselves. He essentially began to threaten to withdraw from the peace process.
I'm not here to please them. On a personal level, I get along well with them, but I'm more interested in the well-being of the people of the United States. They are the ones I work for. I don't work for France, Germany, Japan, or others, even though they are all wonderful people. We constantly receive requests for help in the war in Ukraine, and we have more resources than any other country in the world. But when the United States needed help, they didn't get any. Some European leaders said that the war in Iran is not their war. The war in Ukraine isn't our war either, but we still made a significant contribution.
Well, it's clear what Rubio should do when he knows perfectly well what Trump's position is and knows that Trump doesn't want to put any pressure on Putin at all. At the first opportunity, he rushes to call him and ask for help. Rubio has to make excuses. He doesn't like it, but he might think that the White House is worth the trouble. That's basically been his position for the past year.
In Russia, they immediately started to agree and declared that the US isn't putting enough pressure on Ukraine. And it's specifically the Ukrainians who are to blame for the war still going on.
It also seems that the Americans could, so to speak, really put some pressure and influence Kyiv, get involved in the settlement process. Moreover, they voiced a number of quite interesting, and I would even say useful, ideas and proposals. But so far, none of them have been implemented.
Rubio also had a conflict with the Ukrainian president. Zelensky stated that the Americans are demanding that Ukraine withdraw from Donbas in exchange for security guarantees.
If today Russia is issuing an ultimatum that it will end the war only after the Ukrainian armed forces withdraw from the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and if this ultimatum is being made and the American side says, after Russia ends the war, we will give you guarantees. Otherwise, we will not give you any guarantees. There can be different opinions about this, but all the signals that have come throughout the entire negotiation process indicate, and this is not just my analysis, it is stated quite directly, that we will be able to receive security guarantees from the United States of America not before a ceasefire, not before the end of the war, but only after our troops withdraw from Donbas.
The US Secretary of State was outraged, claiming that the president of Ukraine was supposedly not telling the truth and that no one was putting any pressure on anyone.
That is a lie. And I saw him say it, and it's a real shame that he said that because he knows it's not true. He was not told that. He was told the obvious. Security guarantees will not take effect until the war is over because otherwise you are getting involved in the war. He was told very clearly, and he should have understood that security guarantees only come into effect after the war ends. But this was not connected to him having to give up territory. I don't know why he says this. It's simply not true.
Rubio interprets it this way. As you know, we're not putting pressure on them because we're not directly telling them to withdraw their troops from the Donetsk region. We're simply conveying to them the Russian position. And Zelensky might think that when the Americans link the end of hostilities to the Russian position, they're trying to oppose it. That's pressure, isn't it? Because in theory, the Americans shouldn't be conveying this position to the Ukrainians, but rather telling the Russians that this position doesn't suit them and that they are not going to work with it. Makes sense, right?
At the same time, it should be noted that Europe is finally becoming an independent actor and is increasingly voicing objections to the US and helping Ukraine defend its interests.
The Russian army is suffering record losses in March. But it's not only Ukraine's defense forces eliminating the occupiers. Russian infantry is increasingly engaging in self-destruction. Ukrainian forces are also eliminating Russian troops using innovative methods. All the key details are coming up next.
The first month of spring brought a new negative record for the Russian army. In March, a high number of losses for the Russian army is being recorded. In addition to eliminations by Ukrainian forces, daily video evidence is coming in from the front showing Russian infantry resorting to self-destruction.
For the year 2026, this is quite a high figure. It's not high for 2025, since in 2025 we saw figures of eliminated Russian occupiers reaching 41,000. For example, in March of 2025 it was 41,160 personnel, and in December 35,000. Nevertheless, as a starting point for the beginning of 2026, more than 30,000 losses of Russian occupiers' personnel by the third month is quite a high figure.
Most often, this happens after injuries sustained as a result of drone attacks or in situations of complete encirclement by Ukrainian drones. This was reported by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Mikhailo Fedorov. According to him, such behavior is a consequence of decisions made by the military political leadership of the Kremlin. In particular, Russian propaganda convinces people that the situation is under control and that they have superiority. However, the real picture on the battlefield is significantly different.
The number of suicides in the Russian forces is only increasing. Moreover, this concerns not just suicides in the rear area in rear conditions. A large number of verified suicides, which already exceed 450, only the verified ones, those that have been captured in photos or videos. And if we talk about unverified cases, even OSINT monitoring groups admit that the actual number could be 5 times higher than the verified cases. So this is a very high figure. Roughly once a day or once every 2 days, some drone or another records a suicide.
In addition, according to the minister, the Russian command has effectively forbidden soldiers from surrendering, promoting the narrative that it is better to die immediately. At the same time, the losses of the Russian army continue to grow rapidly.
March could set a record for the number of Russians killed. The trend of defeats indicates that, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces, enemy losses will exceed 30,000 severely wounded and killed.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense also makes an interesting announcement, saying that reaching the mark of 50,000 losses in a month could have catastrophic consequences for the Russian army. The agency hinted at possible additional measures to intensify this trend. The Ukrainian army is also resorting to more creative methods of eliminating the enemy. Ukraine is sending the occupiers insoles with explosives disguised as humanitarian aid to the front. This was reported by Forbes. Ukrainian intelligence officers allegedly placed explosive insoles in shipments destined for Russian military units, which were transported with the help of Russian volunteers and charitable foundations, allowing them to be disguised as ordinary humanitarian aid.
Each insole contains 1.5 grams of TNT. Such a tiny charge won't destroy a vehicle or a bunker. However, if it hits a foot at close range, it can cause serious injury.
The first shipments took place in early March and may have amounted to tens of thousands of units. At the same time, it is reported that the scheme was only partially uncovered after a mistake by one of the participants. Ukrainian agents used at least one intermediary blindly. That is, this person may not have known the true nature of the cargo. This mistake, according to military, helped the FSB identify one of the shipments.
Recently, the number of 200 cases among Russian troops has been steadily and systematically increasing. By the end of the 25th and the beginning of the 26th year, this figure was about 60 to 65% of the total monthly losses. To put it in much simpler terms, the Russian military forces are currently losing significantly more personnel killed in action than those who are merely wounded. Although in general, the historically observed average ratio of killed to wounded is typically about 1 to 3. That is to say, 1 soldier killed for every 3 soldiers wounded on average.
The Ukrainian president also made an interesting statement about Russian losses. According to the head of state, the current ratio of Ukrainian to Russian military losses is about 1 to 8 in Ukraine's favor. Zelensky noted that at the beginning of the full-scale war, this ratio was much lower, about 1 to 3.
What do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video and subscribe to stay informed about the main headlines. See you soon!